So far what we have discussed is we have not explored anything on the Spring yet. Now we'll introduce a Spring. Okay, and if you look at that example, what we saw, we have three different interfaces. One is account repository, reward restaurant repository, and rewards repository, and we have created three steps for it. Okay, if I have an application with having only 3 or 4 dependency to be injected, I don't need a Spring framework anymore. Okay, but most of my enterprise application will have tons of those kind of dependencies to be injected. Like there are tons of classes, each class will have at least like a few dependencies to be injected. So in that case, I want some framework to manage all my dependency injection, and also I wanted to have an order maintained by the framework itself. I don't need to worry about sequencing the orders. I want framework to be maintain the orders. So I request everybody to mute. Okay, so so in this session, so we'll just look at how we can actually start using a Spring and how we can create an application context, and we'll see other part of it. Okay, so moment we talk about an application context in a Spring framework, that plays a very important role. Okay, which is like a Spring application context is a container which takes 2 inputs to create an application context. So what is it, those things? The first thing is all the Pojo classes what you have created, your application classes, like .java classes what you have written, that is going to be an input for this. Okay, so I mean when I say the dot classes, like class files of those Java. Okay, and these classes you have written in a way Spring expecting you to write it. That is using a program to interface. Program to interface. It means each and every classes, the way you designed is loosely coupling by introducing the interfaces. Okay, and now you have created all those Pojos, but you have not connected them at the runtime. Okay, so when now you need to provide an instruction to connect them. How those things need to be connected, so you need to provide an instruction. That's going to be a configuration instructions. So the configuration instructions will tell you this is my transfer service implementation. It requires a JDBC account repository to be injected at the runtime. So these are the few configuration instructions we will be providing, the way these Pojos need to be connected at the runtime. So these two information will be given to a Spring application context, and then outcome of the Spring application context will actually produce a class object that you can use it in your application readily. Creates fully configured application system and ready to use it. And when it comes here, this object gets connected each other, fully created, fully loaded, and to be consumed in your application system, ready to use. Okay, that's at the high level. The way it works is, let's say I have this transfer service implementation, which is an implementation of a transfer service, where I have a constructor, it takes the account repository. Okay, now the dependency is injected through a constructor, and I have created already an instance variable. Account repository is an instance variable, and what I pass in the constructor gets assigned to an instance variable. Okay, and this is an dependency to be injected at the runtime. Now I have this JDBC account repository, which is an implementation of account repository, where this JDBC account repository itself takes an input as a dependency as a data source. Okay, so data source has to be created. Before you are creating a JDBC account repository object, the data source has to be created. So when you create this, first data source object to be created, and then a JDBC account repository will be get created. Then this object need to be injected to a transfer service implementation. That's an order in which it has to be created. Okay. So now if you look at, I'm going to write a configuration instructions. Okay, the way I go and write the configuration instructions using a Java configuration instruction, which is provided by the Spring. Okay, so now I'm going to write one separate class, which class is called as a Java configuration class. This class is not having any business logic. It is purely used for the configuration, provide all the configuration instruction in this class. Okay, that's the way I recognize that is using this annotation, which is a configuration annotation. I'll go and annotate to this class saying that this is my configuration annotation. I'll come back and explain this, what is this configuration later. Okay, right now let's assume.
Hey,
Uh,
Vijay.
sure, go ahead.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but one question. You just told the concept about the container. So whether that does mean that instantiating in each and context is just like loading in container or using container? I didn't
Spring
get that difference. Sorry.
Spring application context itself is a container. That container contains all the Spring beans, which we are going to talk now.
Okay. And so for example, if I create two application context, that does mean that I have got two instances of container?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So now this application configure, I'll provide an instructions of it. The way I provide is in the Java class, I'll just go and write a method. Let's say like transfer service is a method which returns the transfer service object, which is a public. Okay. In the Spring, each and every object what I'm going to create is called as a bean or a Spring bean. Okay, I need to go and annotate each and every Spring bean where it is coming out of from each method. The way I do is I will go and annotate this method as a annotation called a bean. I'm instructing in the configuration saying that treat this guy as a Spring bean object. Okay, this method is going to return the transfer service object, which I want to put it into a Spring container as a bean. So that is what it indicates. Okay, so like this I'll go and write the several methods which having the bean annotation. So account repository is going to create an account repository object, and transfer service method is going to create a transfer service object and returns and put it into a container. So now I have one more thing is I have a data source method which is going to return the data source. Okay, if I go and write this method and start creating an object and it doesn't have anything, it will just return. It will say it doesn't return anything. First of all, the IDE itself will throw an exception saying that this is method supposed to return the transfer service. You'll have to create something here. So let's say if I go and put this, I'll go and put this saying that return new of transfer service implementation, which to be injected as a account repository object, one of the implementation of account repository object. I'll create this object and I'll call this method, which is a reference to another bean object, bean method. Account repository method will be called, and this guy will return a new of JDBC account repository where the data source is being injected here. So the data source itself doesn't have any dependencies. It just have some configuration to be added, like what is my driver name, what is the URL, what is the username and password, things like that. If you provide those information, you will be able to create the data source. The data source method will go and create this object, which is a data source object, by having all this dependencies, the configuration details. Like this is my driver name, this is a URL, user ID, and password, things like that. So once it is done created with all setting these parameters, it returns the data source object, and this data source object gets injected to the JDBC account repository, and this JDBC account repository gets injected into transfer service implementation. Okay, and you don't need to worry about writing this in any order. Automatically, the way the dependency injection been called, automatically Spring will figure out. Okay, so order in which it has to create is been figured out by a Spring framework itself. You don't need to worry about. I just need to go and write the method. Automatically, Spring will find out the order. Okay, the way I write is I'll go and write a configuration Java configuration file, which is a Java, and inside I'll go and add the each and every method. Each and every method will be annotated with a @bean annotation, and the return object will be a transfer service. Okay. So now if I want to inject some other dependency Spring Bean into this, I will go and call that method to get injected. It's very simple. So couple of things I want to emphasize here is, if you look at this transfer service method name, the way it is being created in the container, okay, which each and every bean should need to have a unique identifier. It's a unique ID or unique name to the bean. Okay, so that has to be now that is being determined based on your method name. So the method name will become the bean name or bean ID. Okay, and here is the transfer service will become an ID for this transfer service object. Account repository will become an ID for the JDBC account repository object, and data source will be an ID of this object, basic data source object. So that's how the ID gets created automatically by default. This is the default behavior. Okay, and once this configuration has been created, okay, inside the memory, it will kind of creates a map structure for you. Okay, map will be like key and object value, right? So key will become the bean ID, which is like a transfer service, account repository, or data source. So this will become a bean ID, and this will become an object associated to that ID. Okay, so this is the kind of structure it is used in the behind the scene to store this object and keys.
Hello, Manju.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt in between. Actually, my session got disconnected in between, so I think I lost 5 to 10 minutes of session. So if you can give a quick brief, about Spring application context from that point to this point, it will be good of you.
Yeah. So I was just talking about how you can go and write a Java configuration things. Okay. The first thing is what I talked about is in the Java configuration instruction. First, you'll go and write the Java class, and inside you're going to write a method, and each method will have its name and return object, and it is been marked with an annotation called bean.
Deal.
Okay, and here each and every method will return the object. Now this transfer service implementation requires the JDBC account repository object, which is of account repository type. So that is getting injected here. And before you are creating a JDBC account repository, you need a data source. So this data source doesn't have any dependency to anything else other than some configuration. So this gets created, injected here, and this object gets created and injected here.
Okay.
Okay, that's one thing. So now let's say the way it is being created, right? The object which will be created like a map. The map is something like let me show you that the way the key and okay, the key here will be the key and object, right? The key will be transfer service is the key. Okay, and object here service impl will be the object. Okay, the same as account repository is a key, because this is the method name. Account repository is the method name, and what you create here is JDBC account repository, and same as the data source, and you have the basic data source object. Okay, so inside you have a map like this, and you have a storage. The way it is done is using this. Is it clear? So now you have a key and associated object by doing this. Okay, Now if you look at now I need to go and create an application context. The way I create an application context, so far what I have done is I have done application configuration instructions. Okay. Now I need to give this instruction to an application configuration to create a context. Okay. The way I can create an application context using a Spring is using an application context, one of the implementation. So there's an application context is an interface, and an implementation of application context is an annotation config application context. Okay, this is one of the implementation. I'll give the pointer here I'll pass this application config dot class. Uh, this class is nothing but it has a configuration instructions which I've created in the previous slide. So this is my configuration application config. This class I'll be giving an input for creating an application context here. So annotation config application context where I give an input as a configuration file. Okay, so what it does is when it creates this object application context, behind the scene it will take this application context and it goes through each and every method which has been annotated for it. It takes this key, method name will become the key, and what it returns this method will become an object. Okay, this is becomes a key. All this method name will become the key, and the method which is going to return as an object will become a value of that key, and that is going to be scanned for all the method which is annotated with the beans. Okay, once the application context is created, okay, the way the context looks like is in the context application context it has a key and value. If I give this a transfer service, you will get this object. If I give the account repository, you will get this object. If I give this key as a data source, you will get this object. Okay, so now I need to go and do a lookup. Okay, once the application context is created, this becomes a container now. Okay, the application context becomes a container. Now once the container is available, context dot get bean with a bean ID I will do it. So this is the bean ID which is I am talking about the method name. So transfer service if I give to do a lookup, part of this context dot get bean, I will get the transfer service implementation object which I am casting to interface object. Okay, so once I have this interface object, I will take this service object and invoke the method which is there in the transfer service. So service dot transfer, I want to transfer $300 from account 1 to account 2. Is this clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we did so far is, so we have created an application context Java class, which is a Java application config dot class we have created. Inside that we have a 3 method, and each and every method is annotated with a @bean, and method name will become an unique bean ID. Okay, and method returns the object. That object will become associated with a key. And once this context gets created, using the context, I do a lookup with a bean ID. I'll ask for the object to be written for this ID, and I'll get this object, and always I cast it to an interface object. Okay, so then I'll take this object and start using in my application. Okay, so by default, the object gets created only once in its lifetime by default, and how many times you are going to refer this transfer service, you will get the object reference to the same object every time. Clear? You think?
Clear.
Hey, Manjuna.
Yeah.
Hey, please go ahead. I think for dependency injection, in this example, we are using Java config, right?
Correct. Correct.
So, I mean, to my experience, that Java config has got less acceptance from the industry. So, at least I haven't seen a lot of cases or a lot of examples where we are using Java config as a dependency injection. So, do you know any specific scenario where Java config is a best suit or is a best fit for a dependency injection scenario?
First thing I will put this. I would not answer your question everything right now. Okay. First, we'll look at all these three different approaches. One using a Java configuration, one with an annotation, one with an XML. Okay, and we'll go through all the advantage and disadvantage, and we'll choose the best option based on your need. Okay, and
Okay.
specifically like till 3.x, Spring was promoting the XML based configuration, and after looking at a lot of business cases and demands, in the 4.x onwards, they're promoting the Java configuration. But the Spring provides all three different configuration and supports all of them. It's up to the developer architect to use which one to use it.
Okay. Thanks.
Hmm? Okay. Okay. So there are multiple ways you can go and access the beans. One, the thing is like one you can go and access using the bean ID and where you can cast it. This is the first way, and second way like you don't need to worry about casting here. Instead of that, you pass the what to be casted class, casting class. Okay, a part of your get bean itself, it will automatically cast for you and return the object for you, casted object. Okay, another one is, and if you think that there is only one object that is there in the container, then you just pass the class type itself. Based on the class type, as long as it is having only one unique object, it will return that object. So moment it finds a two instance of this class type, okay, and it will throw an exception. You will have to fall back to one of this. Okay, so there is a different ways of you can access this. So that's about it. So inside the Spring application context, how it looks is when you load this annotation config application context, when you create this, what happens behind the scene is first we'll go and create a data source, which is a basic data source object. And then this object gets injected to the JDBC account repository, and its bean ID is account repository, and this object gets injected to a transfer service implementation, which is a transfer service object. Okay, and once the application context is completely created, all the beans have been created upfront, and all the required dependencies based on your configurations are fully injected. Dependency injections are completely done based on your application configuration instruction, and these objects are ready to use. All these beans are called as a Spring beans or a beans in the container. So this becomes a application context becomes a container, and you have an bean ID and object. So based on the bean ID, you can go and do a lookup to get that object and start using it. Okay, this is what happens. In a quick summary, Spring makes the life cycle of creating all the beans. So you don't need to worry about all the beans object. The Spring beans object is created by Spring framework itself. All beans are fully initialized before you start using it. So during the application context creation itself, all the beans gets created automatically upfront, and all those bean objects are there in the container. Okay, so beans are always created in the right order. Doesn't matter how you write it, but it will create in the right order based on the dependency injection. Okay, each bean is bound to an unique ID. So always the ID which is there by default, method name will become an ID, and if that's a default behavior, if you want to override, you can override that. We'll see that later. Okay, so this is a quick summary of how the simple dependency injection using a Java configuration works.